Hello and welcome to Your Broken Galaxy. I am Broken, and today I am going to be doing part 2 of What If Anakin Was a Girl. Just so you all know, I do of course have a part 1. I went over episodes 1, 2, and 3 in part 1. This video is going to cover episodes 4, 5, and 6, what would have been the original trilogy. If you'd like to, I would highly recommend watching part 1 first. There's a link in the description below. Let's go. 19 years have passed since the rise of the Emperor, and a period of civil war has taken over the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance has managed to steal the plans of the Empire's secret weapon, the Death Star, and Princess Leia is on her way to a friendly planet with those plans. A small blockade runner, under her command, is flying through space in a desperate attempt to get the news of the D-Star to famed hero of the rebellion, Shaak Ti, living on Naboo. In hot pursuit, however, is an Imperial Star Destroyer carrying Darth Vader, Lady of the Sith. The blockade runner is captured and the stormtroopers board the vessel. Hovering over Naboo, a planet which Darth Vader despises because that's where she saw her mother die, Leia decides that she's just going to throw her 2 droids into an escape hatch and blast it down to the planet. Vader captures Leia, viciously mocks her hair, and has her thrown into the brig. Meanwhile, the droids land in the swamps outside of Theed. They start making their way to the city when they are found by Gungans. Gungans that happen to recognize R2-D2 as Padme's droid. They bring the droid into the town and end up finding themselves at Shmi's husband, C.O. Bibble's house. His nephew Luke comes in and says, "Grandpa, I just got finished cleaning the stables." Well, I mean, I didn't clean the stables. Can you imagine? I just finished overseeing our dozens of servants cleaning the stables. "Hey, what's with those 2 droids?" And C.O. is like, "Nothing, just go to your room and engage in any of your wildly expensive and extravagant hobbies." And he does. But later that evening, Luke gets curious and comes to see the droids. He takes off R2's restraining bolt because he's interested in it, and Luke steps out for an evening swim in the football field-sized swimming pool that's behind their house. While this is happening, R2 runs away. C-3PO tells Luke about the trouble, and Luke ends up going to find him after he towels off. Out on the streets, Luke is approached by some local ruffians that had gotten more bold since the Empire took over. However, out of the shadows, the horned hermit Shaak Ti jumps to save him and scare them off. Shaak Ti brings Luke to her apartment, and R2 plays a message. "General Shaak Ti, years ago, you served my father in the Clone Wars. Now he begs you to help him in his struggle against the Empire. I regret that I am unable to present my father's request to you in person. Our ship has fallen under attack, and I'm afraid my mission to bring you to Alderaan has failed. I've placed information vital to the survival of the rebellion into the memory systems of this R2 unit. My father will know how to retrieve it. You must see this droid safely to him on Alderaan. This is our most desperate hour. Help me, Shaak Ti. You're my only hope." And Shaak Ti looks over and says, "Luke, we're going on a road trip to Alderaan." And Luke says, "Oh, sure, cool. Alderaan is great this time of year. My grandfather likes skiing in the Southern Alps." So Luke and Shaak Ti head to C.O. Bibble's place, and Luke says, "I'm going with Shaak Ti to Alderaan to fight the Empire." And C.O. Bibble says, "Oh, great. I was wondering when your Jedi training was going to begin. You'll be a Jedi just like your mother before you." And Luke says, "Thanks, Grandpa. I'll bring you a souvenir." They hug, and then Shaak Ti and Luke head to the spaceport to charter a flight. The stormtroopers have, by this point, of course, come down and tried to totally lock down the city, but Shaak Ti is able to sneak past them. They run into a bar by the spaceport and come across Chewbacca and Han Solo, and Shaak Ti says, "We need passage to Alderaan." And Han says, "The Empire has the place locked down. It'll be 10,000. And Luke reaches in his pocket, takes out, and hands 10,000 credits worth of chips, and says, "I hope cash will do." And Han says, "Yes, that will do nicely. I was about to go to Tatooine to pay off Jabba the Hutt, but because of the Imperial lockdown, I got a little spooked. Anyway, let's get going." Meanwhile, Grand Moff Tarkin and Darth Vader make Leia watch the destruction of her homeworld. She tries to sell out Dantooine because she has no ethical backbone, but they blow up Big A anyway. So the troops get to the Millennium Falcon and it blasts off. The ship is nimble and valiant, and they are able to jump to light speed, escaping the Star Destroyers. On the way, Shaak-Ti starts teaching Luke about the use of the Force, and Han says, "You know, for an alien, you're pretty attractive," to Shaak-Ti. To which she says, "You know, for a human, you're pretty smug." And Han says, "Good for you. I put the smug in smuggler, hun." After spending a little bit of time watching them train, Han says, "Luke, kid, you know the Force is garbage, right?" To which Shaak-Ti lifts a piece of leather off the ground with the Force and smacks Han in the face. And Han says, "How did you do that?" To which Shaak-Ti says, "The Force, you moron." And Chewbacca here, he fought with the Jedi, you know, in the Clone Wars. And Han looks over at Chewie, who kind of shrugs and nods his head. They make their way to Alderaan to find the place that has been totally destroyed. They end up getting tractor beamed into the D-Star and hiding in the smuggling compartments. They ruthlessly slaughter a scanning team, and Han and Luke put on some stormtrooper uniforms. They get to the control room, and Shaak-Ti says she is going to take down the tractor beam. R2 finds out that Leia is on board, and Luke says, "We have to go save her." And Han says, "Not a chance, loser." So Luke says, "How about another 10,000? And Han says, "Let's go." So they handcuff Chewie and walk up to the prison room. They blast up the place like madmen. Han tells Luke which cell she's in and sends him down the hallway. Luke opens the door and sees her lying there sleeping peacefully on a cold slab of metal just after having seen her home blown to pieces. And she sits up and cracks a joke, saying, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?" To which Luke says, "Huh? Oh, the uniform." He takes off his helmet, steps forward, and says, "I'm Luke Bibble. I'm here to rescue you." And Leia just laughs and says, "Your name is Bibble?" And he says, "I'm here to rescue you. I've got your R2 unit. I'm here with Shaak-Ti." And she says, "Shaak-Ti? Where is she?" And they go running out of the cell. So the troop ends up having to jump down the garbage chute after a little bit of a shoot out, and they all barely get out, but end up making it and start running. They get split up. Luke and Leia jump across the little bridge. Han and Chewie scream a lot. Meanwhile, Shaak-Ti has shut down the tractor beam, and upon returning to the ship has come across Darth Vader. And let me tell you, she's mad. Lady Vader is like cussing and complaining about how she was betrayed. Shaak-Ti just lets her feelings pour out about how she was betrayed. They argue for like a good 50 minutes, so much so that they never end up making it to the hangar bay. Luke, Leia, Han, Chewie, and the droids all get to the ship and start a massive firefight with the stormtroopers, while the two Force's female users over here are just whining at each other. But a couple of captains come up and say, "Lady Vader, the intruders have made it to the ship." To which Shaak-Ti is like, "Oh, snap," and ends up just sending Luke a message in the Force telling him to leave. And they do. Finally, Vader and Shaak-Ti end up igniting their lightsabers, and General Grievous shows up out of nowhere and stabs Shaak-Ti in the back. Not really. Vader cuts her down as Shaak-Ti sends Luke a message in the Force saying, "I will always be with you." The band of rebels make it to Yavin, and they get ready to fight. Han gets an absolutely insane amount of money and just takes off. As the Death Star approaches Yavin 4, the rebels launch their attack and end up taking down the D-Star and everyone on it with the help of Han, who decided to come back in his space RV. But Vader gets away. At the medal ceremony, Luke comes walking in, not smiling like an idiot, but with the refined dignity of someone of the noble houses of Naboo would be expected to have. 3 years have passed, and Luke, due to his noble Nubian bloodline, or at least that's what everyone thinks, is not sent out on patrol like some schlub on a tauntaun. No, he is at the base. He is in a position of leadership. Han, however, does go out on patrol with some other grunt. Han finds the probe droid and they all realize the Empire is coming, and the Wampa makes a nice lunch out of whoever that other guy was. At the funeral of that other poor guy that the Wampa ate, Luke, overwhelmed by grief, sees a vision of Shaak-Ti say, "You must go to Dagobah to seek out the Jedi Master Yoda." And Luke says, "Of course." However, the Empire arrives, sadly for them, just a little too close to the planet, and Vader gets really mad at Admiral Ozzel. However, instead of just silently choking him, she berates him and tears him down publicly in front of all his men. She rips his rank insignia off and has a toilet cleaning droid sent into the room so she can personally slash it to pieces with her lightsaber and give the former Admiral Ozzel the job of cleaning the toilets. Then she records a 30-second video of herself talking about how much of an idiot that he is and posts it to the HoloNet. General Veers launches his attack on Echo Base, and oh, what a glorious day it is for the Empire. They're finally able to strike back for the destruction of the D-Star. Luke flies out on a snowspeeder with the rest of the pilot corps, and Han ends up getting Leia to escape with him. I mean, he practically abducted her, but you know, she wanted to be abducted. Luke takes out a few AT-ATs and makes it to his X-Wing and flies off to Yoda to start Jedi summer camp. Han and Leia, meanwhile, end up going on their little adventure to Cloud City. Lando, the ever-charming smooth talker that he is, walks them into a fancy high-ceiling banquet hall after they arrive, and he has a nice little catch-up session with Han. But lo and behold, in vibrant hot pink armor stands Darth Vader, Lady of the Sith. Han pulls out his blaster to shoot, but Lady Vader force pulls it to herself and berates him for his arrogance of assuming that he could take her down. Really, how could someone as wonderful as herself be brought low by some scruffy-looking loser? And Han says, oh, you know I'm not scruffy-looking, sweetheart. So they all sit down and have a nice meal, at the end of which Vader tells the waiter to give Han the bill. Typical, he says, right before being taken out to get tortured. Luke has now experienced a force vision of his friends being captured and decides to leave Dagobah to save them. Yoda is like, go, you cannot. And Luke is like, I actually can, but I'll be back. Or perhaps, if you like, next time we'll do Jedi summer camp in the Lake Country on my homeworld Naboo. Back on Cloud City, Lady Vader tells Lando that she is changing the terms of the deal, and Lando says, oh, come on, sweetheart, that isn't what we agreed on. And Vader says, well, I'm changing my mind. And Lando says, but dear, I think the plan we had at first was pretty good. And he looks into the massive eyes of her helmet, and she looks back at his dreamy brown eyes, transfixed by his charm and success, but then shakes her head and says, I need to be alone, Lando. So Lando says, all right, suit yourself, and walks away. And Vader says, why did he just leave like that? They end up getting to the carbon freezing chamber, and Chewie tries to fight his way out, but Han's like, no, save Leia. And Vader thinks to herself, okay, this guy is a man's man right here. He stands on the platform, and Leia looks over at him with uncertainty of never knowing what will happen to him, and steps forward to say, I love you. And Han, good old Han, looks back at Leia, dead in the eyes, and says, I know. And Lady Vader's jaw drops inside her helmet, because she is just crushed by this. Like, Lando was smooth and all, but Han, she is incapable of not feeling something for that bad boy charm that he's got going on. Anyway, Luke ends up flying to Bespin and sees Boba Fett taking Han and Leia being led away by Lando. Luke walks into the freezing chamber and immediately hears Lady Vader say, Luke, I'm so glad you made it. Luke ignites his lightsaber and Vader says, Luke, you should use your words, hun. He charges and she is forced to ignite her own saber. Lady Vader is very strong with the Force, but Luke is more physically imposing because, you know, he's a 22-year-old man and Vader is a middle-aged woman. So it is fairly even fight. Eventually, Lady Vader lets her pride slip just a tiny bit and decides to start force-throwing old appliances at Luke instead of beating him with a saber. Luke gets hit hard by a few things because he can't multitask on the saber fight and the objects at the same time. Lady Vader charges him and is able to slice off his hand. Luke, distraught, says, how could I let a girl beat me? Under his breath. And Vader says, oh, sweetheart, that's gotta hurt. I'm so sorry. And Luke says, I'm sorry. What? And Vader says, Luke, you don't realize how special you are. You're going to be so great. Join me, and we'll end the fighting. And Luke says, I'll never join you. And then Vader says, if you only knew the power of the dark side. Shakti never told you what happened to your mother. And Luke says, she told me enough. She told me you killed her. And Vader says, oh, sweetie, I am your mother. And Luke says, no, that's not true. That's impossible. And Vader says, just listen to your feelings and you'll know I'm right. And Luke screams, no. And Vader says, Luke, you can destroy the Emperor. He's foreseen it. Join me and I'll help you. We can take the Emperor's place. And Luke looks at Vader, then down at the massive hole. And Vader says, Luke, You should back away from that ledge. It's dangerous. And Luke looks back at Vader, then lets go and falls. And Vader screams, "Oh, my baby boy!" and reaches out in a vain attempt to grab him. Leia and Lando have by this time escaped, and Luke uses the Force to call Leia so they can come and pick him up. Vader says in the Force, "Luke," and Luke says, "Mother?" And Vader says, "Luke, come back to Mama." And Luke says, "Chuck T, why didn't you tell me?" They blast off to hyperspace. Luke gets a new hand, and Lando and Chewie go off to find Han. The scene opens with two droids slowly trudging through the desert to Jabba's remote palace. They arrive and are immediately put to work. A short while later, a striking bounty hunter brings in Chewbacca and negotiates a price for his capture with Jabba. Late that evening, the bounty hunter breaks into the throne room, frees Han Solo, takes off her helmet, and bam, it's Leia. Jabba does his best Santa impression. There is just a massive amount of excitement in the Rancor pit and then the Sarlacc pit, but the heroes all escape, and Luke is like, "Hey guys, I've got to go to Jedi summer camp again." And Leia says, "Oh, will it be on Naboo this year?" And Luke says, "No, it'll be in the mosquito and snake-infested swamp world again." And Leia says, "You know, that is what was great about Alderaan summer camps. We didn't have many bugs like mosquitoes, just the Killiks." So Luke flies to see Grandmaster Yoda, and he's like, "Yoda, is Darth Vader my mother?" And Yoda says, "Die I will, very soon." And Luke's like, no, you look great for your age. You're gonna be just fine." And Yoda just stares at him incredulously. And Luke says, "Anyway, I need your help." And Yoda is like trying to dodge the conversation. So he's like, "Everything you require, already you have." So Luke says, "Then I am a Jedi." But Yoda's like, "Not so fast, young Bibble. Confront Lady Vader, you must." And Luke says, "Master Yoda, is Darth Vader my mother?" And Yoda, sly old man that he is, says, "Nap time it is." And Luke is like, "Master Yoda, you've got to tell me." And Yo-Yo is like, "Your mother is." And Luke is like, "Oh, no way, that's so trippy." And then Yoda fades off to space heaven. And Luke goes outside, and the ghost of Shaak Ti says, "Oh, really quick, Yoda forgot to tell you Leia's your sister. Okay, bye." So Luke flies back to the fleet, and Han and Lando and Leia and Chewie and the rest are all getting ready to spring their amazing attacks. So they set the plan, and Luke is like, "I'll go to the Forest Moon too." They arrive at the Forest Moon, and Luke is freaking out, and he's like, "Vader's on that ship." And Han says, "Of course Vader's on that ship. Where the heck else would she be?" And Luke says, "I shouldn't have come. I've been endangering the mission." And Han says, "Are you some kind of freaking moron? You had to know that Vader would be here." Anyway, they make it down to the planet, befriend the Care Bears, and Luke goes to tell Leia, all broody and sad, and says, "Do you have any memories of your dad? Your real dad?" And Leia's like, "Wait a second, how did you know I was adopted?" And Luke says, "Leia, please." And she's like, "Yeah, he died when I was very young." And Luke says, "You better believe you were young. You were still in the womb." And Leia says, "What the heck are you on about?" And Luke says, "You're my freaking sister, and Darth Vader's our freaking mom." And Leia says, "Somehow I've always known." And Luke says, "Then why the actual heck did you kiss me on Hoth? That was freaking messed up. If you had known all along, Leia, really? Would you have done that?" And Leia just kind of shrugs and says, "I wanted to make Han jealous." So Luke goes and turns himself in, and Lady Vader is like, "Oh, you constructed a new lightsaber. This is so good. By the way, you are going to join the Emperor." So they get up to the D-Star the next day, and the rebels begin their attack on the Forest Moon. And the other rebels jump into the system and begin their attack on the Death Star. Chaos ensues, but in the Death Star, Luke and his mom approach the Emperor. Good old Palpy turns around in his chair and says, "Welcome, young Bibble. I've been expecting you." He undoes Luke's handcuffs and sends the Red Guards out of the room in order to make sure that they are completely incapable of performing their one job of protecting him. And he says, "I'm looking forward to completing your training. In time, you will learn to call me Father." And Luke just turns to look at Vader and says, "You marry the Emperor." And Vader says, Luke, okay, it was a political marriage. Nothing has ever happened between us. And Luke says, the Emperor is my freaking stepfather. And Vader says, Luke, no, okay, listen here. It's about imperial succession. We did it to make the bureaucrats happy, or else they would have just been an endless headache. And then Palpatine is all like, and Luke says, you won't convert me like you did my mom. And Palps is like, you're mistaken about a great many things. Vader hands Palps the lightsaber, and Palps is like, you have to know your mom can never return to the light. You'll follow in her footsteps. And Luke says, you're wrong. Soon we'll all be dead. And then they're all like, banter, 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 and the rebels finally start this massive attack. So Luke looks out the window and just sees all of his friends being blasted to pieces. And the Emperor's like, take your weapon and strike me down. Give in to your anger. And Luke is all, no! But then he's all like, okay! And grabs the lightsaber with the Force to try and strike down the Emperor. Vader, however, puts her saber up to block Luke, but Luke is so much stronger that he just kind of pushes through. The Emperor has to push himself back a bit with the Force to save him so that Luke's saber doesn't get him. And then Luke and Mama V start their big fight. Luke is doing a really good job, and Vader is like, Shakti has taught you well. And Luke says, I won't fight you, Mother. And then she says, you're unwise to lower your defenses. And Luke immediately goes back to fighting her, despite what he just said. Luke then says, your thoughts betray you, Mother. I feel the good in you, the conflict. And Lady Vader says, there is no conflict. Vader does a saber throw, but Luke dodges it and starts hiding, and Vader says, you can't hide forever. And Luke says, I won't fight you. And his mom says, Luke, listen to your mother and give yourself to the dark side. It's the only way to save your friends and your sister. And Luke says, how did you know about my sister? And Vader says, are you serious? I'm your mom. I had like 3 ultrasounds before you were born. I knew that I was carrying twins, and the doctors very clearly told me that one was a boy and one was a girl. That isn't something Yoda and Shakti could have hidden from me very easily. Anyway, if you won't join me, then perhaps she will. And he's like, no, and starts fighting back with everything he has. They go out into the little bridge thing. Luke finally overpowers his mom, pushing her back and chopping off her hand. As he stands over her, he says, oh, Mom, man, I'm sorry. That was a little too far, wasn't it? Then he hears the Emperor laughing and say, your hate has made you powerful. Now, strike down your mother. And Luke says, you're a terrible husband and a terrible stepfather. And Palp says, don't you backsass me, boy. Strike her down and take your mother's place as my rightfully adopted and legitimized heir to the Empire. And Luke says, never. I'll never turn to the dark side. You failed stepfather. I am a Jedi like my father before me, and also my mother before me. And he throws away the saber. So Palpatine says, so be it, and just starts zapping him. Vader gets up and Luke says, Mommy, please! And Vader says, my baby boy! And grabs the Emperor with a Force, not just by her one remaining hand, and tosses him over the railing. Luke rushes over to his mom and starts trying to pull her off the D-Star, and just no one is helping Darth Vader for some reason. Annie asks Luke to take the mask off, and he's like, but you'll die. And she says, nothing can stop that now. Just let Mommy look on you with her own eyes, just once. So Luke takes off the helmet, and let me tell you, she does not look very healthy. Like, she's in bad shape. And she says, now go, my son, leave me. And Luke says, I've got to save you. And Vader says, oh, that's sweet. And dies without admitting that Luke was right. So Luke drags her body onto a shuttle that for some reason nobody else used to escape the currently exploding Death Star, flies her body down to Endor, burns it in the woods by himself, and the galaxy lives happily ever after. Well, not really, because, you know, they have the Imperial Remnant, and there is still the Yuzhang Vong, and well, there's a lot of stuff. So the galaxy doesn't live happily ever after, but at least Palpatine's gone. Well, that is my video for today. I hope you guys liked it. I'm sure my regular listeners have noticed my mic quality is way down. My microphone broke, and I cannot figure out how to fix it. so I apologize. It's been a long time since I did one of these videos, and I've got a couple more in mind, but I am probably going to be closing down this channel. Not going to be making any more videos. I probably got like 5 or 6 left in me after this one, unless this somehow goes like crazy viral and people actually start paying attention to the channel. In one of those videos, I'm going to be going over 150 orders of the Clone Wars. What were the 150 clone orders? If you have a suggestion, rather funny or serious, I would like both of them to mix in with that. It's going to be a long video, probably a live stream in December, and I still need a lot of orders. You can give me a specified number, but most of the numbers that would be like numbers people want to take are already taken, so I might take whatever order you give me and give it a different number. Other than that, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and all that garbage.